When you're playing a group of songs in a worship set, an important thing to think about is the transition between those songs. But songs are in different keys or have different tempos or a different mood altogether. So how do you craft smooth transitions in your worship set to create flow? Hey, it's Dave Dolphin at practicalworshipblog.com, sharing ideas, tips, and practical advice for the everyday worship leader. And the transition between your songs is an important thing to consider when you're crafting your worship sets. I saw this tweet the other day. It says, "Your worship leader is not a jukebox. Assume they have thoughtfully selected the songs you sing together." That really resonates with me because we're not just sharing a group of songs, we're building a worship set, one musical experience. You're telling a story over the course of several songs. You're taking people on a journey. So crafting smooth transitions between songs and creating great flow from one song to the next helps the set to feel more cohesive. The in-betweens are the moments where people are the most conscious to what's going on. For example, how many people notice when you blow a chord in the middle of a song versus blowing a chord in the intro of a song? If you want to help people stay in the moment, help them to not wonder what's going on, what's happening next. Before they realize something is ending, the next thing is beginning. So here's a couple of examples. The ideal situation is just to stay in the same key. This feels cohesive. Notice that the texture carried over from the first song into the second. The sound of that pad, it carries over and you don't even realize that they're starting a new song until she starts singing. So here's another example of staying in the same key and the same tempo.
My hope is built on nothing less.
The band just keeps going, and the only significant way to tell when the first song ended and the second song began is actually the lighting change. Now, these are ideal situations, and I wouldn't want to force this to happen every single time, but I do look for opportunities to stay in the same key, and I jump on them whenever I can, and personally, I actually do this a lot. It's a simple and effective way to keep things flowing. Now, if I need to change keys, I try to stay in relative keys. There's something called the circle of fifths in music theory, and the most dominant chords in any key are going to be the 1, the 4, and the 5, and it's within these 3 chords where relative keys are going to share chords. So for example, you might be in the key of D. If the next song is in G, you can make the transition smooth because both keys share the same chords. Watch as this band goes from the key of D to the key of G.
It's so good to see you all here this afternoon. You know, in our world right now, there's a lot to be worried about or afraid of.
The first song was in D, which puts the G as the 4 chord, but when you transition into G, the G becomes the 1 chord and the D becomes the 5. Relative keys share chords, and it can be really helpful in making transitions smooth. Here's another example of the circle of fifths. The first song is in the key of E, but it ends on a B, the 5 chord, which makes getting into the next song, which is in B, that much easier.
I want to share a verse from Philippians. You know, as we've kind of set aside this day to study the Word, you know, this morning and tonight.
And using that opportunity to share, to talk, also helps soften the transition from the different keys. We're about to go into the song Death Was Arrested, so we're transitioning between keys, different tempos, and different time signatures. If you need to transition from 2 keys that are not relative but still keep the energy up, starting with a drum intro is a great way to transition. Here's an example of going from the key of C into the key of E. Having the drums play for just a few bars keeps the energy up, but it cleanses your tonal palette, so to speak. You kind of forget what the previous chords were and you start fresh, but there's still this consistent flow forward. Now here's one of my favorite transitions. This song is in the key of G, but the next song is in D minor. Watch how they do this. In the key of G, they end on a D major, but they don't play the third within the D major chord. It's the third within that chord that determines if the chord is major or minor. So even though you don't hear the third, you sense it within the chord because within the key of G, that chord is major. But then this open D chord becomes the D minor chord for the next song. It isn't the circle of fifths, but this is a great example of finding commonality between the ending of one song and the beginning of another. And if you can't find a common chord between the songs, maybe you can find a common note. Here's an example of moving from E flat to D. This is definitely a worst case scenario, but with some planning and with some skill within music theory, this band makes it work. Because if you play a D, just the note, not a chord, in the key of E flat, it makes the E flat chord an E flat major 7, so it's not completely out of place. So as they end this song, the guitar player is going to play an ambient part using a single note, the D, which fits in the key. It creates a bit of tension since it's the major 7 of the scale, but that's going to work in the band's favor because the transition into D, where the D becomes the root note for the chord instead of the major 7, actually releases the tension. The keyboard player is going to explain a little bit more how this transition works.
And then we kind of just parked there on this. And I might have like hinted at that major 7, that D, doing that, you know? And then Daniel will do his little prettiness. And then I'll count out the next thing. And a 1, 2, 3. So which should have been like an absolute train wreck going from E flat to D. Get there kind of smooth.
So these are some real-world examples to help you transition between songs smoothly and to keep a common flow. Remember, it's not just a jukebox of songs you're sharing, it's a story you're telling. Well, here at Practical Worship, we love sharing ideas and tips and practical advice for the everyday worship leader with videos just like this every single Tuesday. So if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. If you know someone that might benefit from this information, consider sharing the link on Facebook or Twitter or send someone an email. And for great practical advice, check out practicalworshipblog.com.